Hello dog lovers, Leah Will here with the Balanced Dog LLC, and this week on Desk Discussions we are going to go over my training handout that I give out for my group puppy class and my group starter class. So this is for people who are just starting to work with their dogs, and it gives you kind of a little bit of stepping stone of where to start, why we're doing the things we do when working with the dogs, and kind of give you some more information to help improve your training ability with your dog. So this video will have two parts. Part one, we're going to talk about how dogs learn, positive and negative, reinforcement and punishment, and a little bit on behavior modification. I don't dive too much into behavior modification with my handout because a lot of times puppies or some of the older dogs, we're working more on commands and certain follow through and not necessarily fixing problem behaviors. We'll have some other videos that'll dive into that a little more in depth. Video 2, so part 2 of this, we will be covering early training sequences versus eventual goals, and we will be covering prompts versus reinforcement, and then a reward scale. So next week we'll post that video and I'll cover those things. So let's dive in. How do dogs learn? Well, I like to talk about two areas. One we just kind of touch on because you will see it in your home when you have animals. If you have kids, you will see it as well. And then we also talk about operant conditioning because that's usually where training works. So the first part is classical conditioning. If you've taken a psychology class, you're familiar with classical conditioning. Think Pavlov and the dog study he did with pairing a bell with food time and collecting saliva. So originally, you ring the bell, the dogs aren't going to salivate because they have no association with what that bell means. When they would get food though, they'd smell the food, they'd start to salivate and get prepared for eating. Well, after a while, the bell was paired with the feeding time, that when the bell would ring, the dogs would start to salivate because their brain associated that sound with food coming. And so then they had the reflex of, we're going to be eating, we need to salivate to prepare for ingesting our food. So that is classical conditioning. You've taken a reflex that was originally stimulated by a response, and you have now have a different stimulus that gets that same reflex because you've paired the two. So that's classical conditioning. I'm not going to go too much into that because if you want to Google Pavlov, you can find as much as you need to know about classical conditioning. As far as training and for training classes and working with your dog at the beginning, we do mostly operant conditioning. And so operant conditioning is the learning of a voluntary behavior through the effects of pleasant or unpleasant consequences to a response. So basically, if I do this, what's in it for me? And that's kind of how I like to think about it when your dog's doing stuff. If your dog sits, what's in it for him? If your dog jumps, what's in it for him? So if you're thinking about that as a question as a whole, it gives you a little bit better idea of where we're going to come in when we start to work with the dogs. Now, laws of effects I have on here, I feel is kind of common sense, but I have it on here so you can kind of know what's going on. So that's a law that states an action followed by a pleasurable consequence will tend to be repeated. And if it's followed by an unpleasurable consequence, it will tend not to be repeated. So I like to use the example of a button. If you pushed a button, and every time you push this button, you got $100, well, that's fun. You're going to keep pushing that button as much as you can because you want to get that $100 and $100 and $100. So you're going to repeat the behavior of pushing the button because something awesome is happening afterwards. If you push the button and you get shocked, you may push it again. Many of you may not. You're not going to keep pushing that button because something unpleasant occurred. So if you think like that when you're working with your dog, you want to motivate your dog to follow through on things that you want to occur, $100, $100, $100, get you that button push, and you want to say, hey, that's not a good idea for behaviors you don't want to occur. So that's why I give the example of the button push, because I feel then it makes it really simple and going, oh, well, yeah, I totally pushed that button for $100. If I got shocked, I'm not going to do that several times. So we're going to talk about reinforcement versus punishment, and that is basically what is happening, you're controlling the consequences. So this is operant conditioning. Reinforcement is an event or stimulus that follows a response that increases the probability that the response will occur again. So if we want that behavior to repeat, we're going to reinforce it. Now with punishment, it's if we don't want that behavior to repeat, then we're going to punish. And I don't say punish, I don't want you to think like painful. We're going to get into that. So punishment basically means an event or object that follows a response that makes the response less likely to happen again. So punishment could be a word. Don't do that. You're just telling the dog, I don't like that behavior. We're not doing that. And then reinforcement is, yes, continue to do that. That's what I want from you. Now, we're going to dive in here a little bit about reinforcers before we get into positive and negative. Reinforcers, there's two types. The first one is primary. So anything the animal or your dog needs to survive is a primary reinforcer. Food, water, social interaction are primary reinforcers. Treats count because they're food. They may not be, the best quality of food, but they're still food. Social interaction, petting. Some dogs, petting is super high value because that's what they crave. They really crave social interaction with their person, social interaction with other dogs. So it kind of gives you, petting can be used as a reinforcement and as a primary reinforcer. Depends on your dog. Secondary reinforcers are something that has no value until you pair it with a primary reinforcer. And when that pairing is done so much that the secondary reinforcer now is as valuable as that primary reinforcer. Perfect example, clickers. You can click that click all day. If you don't follow that click with anything, that dog doesn't care. The click is just a noise. If you click and treat and click and treat and click and treat and click and treat, the dog's going to start going, oh, well, when I hear that click, I get the treat. So just like the bell with Pavlov. So you're pairing a secondary reinforcer, your clicker, with a primary reinforcer, a treat. You can also do it with a ball. You can also do it with, petting, whatever your dog finds valuable, to make that click noise important. I use for class and for most of the dogs I work with, I use verbal. So I use a verbal command. I usually say yes. And that is my mark word. So instead of clicking to mark the behavior, I say yes. And then I pair it with a reinforcer, a primary reinforcer. So petting, treats, and ball, it kind of goes with what the dog finds high value. Once you've done that a lot of times, then yes, and the dog goes, ooh, that's great. I feel great because you've paired it so much with something of actual value. Now, we're going to talk a little bit here about positive and negative, and I want you to think positive as addition and negative as subtraction. Not good and bad. A lot of people think positive, negative as good and bad. No, it's positive as I'm adding something, negative as I'm taking away something. So for reinforcement, we have positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. A lot of people are familiar with positive reinforcement. You're adding something fun that follows the behavior so the behavior reoccurs. Your dog sits, you give them a treat, they are more likely to sit because you keep giving them treats afterwards. So you are positively reinforcing that sit, that behavior. This works really well and promotes fun in learning with dogs. When you are making things fun, you do this, you get this, you do this, you get this. I always think of, if you went to work and nobody paid you, you're most likely not going to keep going to work because you're not getting anything fun out of it. Unless you love your job, then you might go to work and not care about getting paid because you love it so much. But most people go because they get a paycheck. Now, negative reinforcement is when you're removing something unpleasant so that the behavior will repeat. So remember, positive is addition, negative is subtraction. So now, negative reinforcement, we're removing something. I like to use ear pinching as an example. I don't do this in training, but this is a good example of negative reinforcement. So you want to do a dumbbell retrieve. They used to do quite a bit of this when you would work with obedience and the dog has to run out, get a dumbbell, bring it back to the handler. So pinching the ear till they take the dumbbell into their mouth. As soon as the dog takes the dumbbell into the mouth, you release the pinch. So then the dog wants to pick the dumbbell up faster and faster and faster so they can get rid of that pinch from the ear. So you're removing something unpleasant, the pinch, to get the behavior to reoccur. In my button example, if you were zapped until you hit that button, you'd be hitting that button as fast as you could because you'd want the shock to dissipate and to not happen. So you're removing something not fun to get the behavior to continue. So reinforcement is all about, we want that behavior to keep happening. For class and things, we do a lot of positive reinforcement. So we're pairing, like I said, with treats, balls, something the dog finds valuable. Now, when we talk about punishment, a lot of people think punishment is, punishment's bad. Punishment's, torture, negative. It's not, and it can be very useful, and it depends on how you administer it. So punishment is the same. You have positive punishment and negative punishment. So we're adding something and we're taking away something. Now, punishment means we don't want the behavior to keep happening. So jumping, we don't want the dog to continue to jump on people or ourselves. So positive punishment means the consequence that follows the behavior is unpleasant. Doesn't mean that it's painful, it just means it's unpleasant. Now, sometimes it can be painful, but examples are prong collars, e-collars, a shock collar, a squirt bottle, swatting your dog with a rolled up newspaper. Don't do that, but that's an example. Dog does something unpleasant happens. Now, the squirt bottle's not going to hurt your dog. It's not painful, but it's unpleasant. The dogs don't like it, so that counts as positive punishment. You are adding something unpleasant to get that behavior to stop. Now, negative punishment is you're removing something fun to get that behavior to stop. So you're taking away the fun. Just like when you put your kids in timeout, or if you're going to act that way, then you're not getting any dessert. So you're removing something pleasant and to punish your dog. So my example that I usually use for this one, because most people have gone through it, especially if you have puppies. Your dog is chewing your shoe. You go over and you take the shoe away. They can't chew the shoe. Nope, can't have that. You have negatively punished your dog. You have removed the fun. The fun is no longer there. The shoe is no longer there for them to chew, and you've taken it away. So for me, when I'm working with dogs, I do a lot of positive reinforcement and a lot of negative punishment. So we're removing stuff. Occasionally, we'll do some positive punishment. I've used squirt bottles, things like that. It just depends on the behavior you're working on, and you have to be very careful on not overcorrecting your dog. If you overcorrect, you add too much to your punishment, it becomes severe, then your dog's going to have more fear and anxiety. They're going to associate the punisher and not the behavior with the punishment. So if the rolled up newspaper, perfect example, if the dog pees on the floor and you swat the dog with the rolled up newspaper, and you do that every time, the dog associates the swat and the newspaper with you, not necessarily the peeing on the floor. So they may pee on the floor just away from you so they don't get the swatted rolled up newspaper. So when you're using punishments, there's 3 musts. You have to follow these for it to be effective. Otherwise, you're just making your dog confused. You're stressing them out. You're doing everything the opposite of what you want to do when working with your animal. The 3 musts are, you want to be consistent. So if you are going to punish the dog for said behavior, you want to make sure you're always doing it the same for the same behavior. So they understand that behavior gets this punishment. Otherwise, if you try to do different punishments for the same behavior, you're going to confuse the dog. They're not going to associate the correlation between the two because there's multiples. Or if you're doing the same punishment for a bunch of things, then the dogs can become confused and just think they can't do anything without getting this punishment because all of a sudden it just appears for everything that they do. And then you want to make sure that you're consistent, that the punishment immediately follows the behavior you want to be punished. So if the shoe chewing example is great because the dog's chewing the shoe. So you taking away the shoe, you're immediately punishing that behavior by removal because that's what's occurring. a good example of not doing, your dog peed in the house 3 hours ago and then you punish the dog. That was 3 hours ago. The dog is not going to associate that peeing with the punishment. The dog's going to associate with you coming home and the punishment. Even if you take them over and rub their nose in it, all you're really doing is bullying your dog and kind of being a jerk about it. They don't understand that that's exactly what has occurred. Then you want to make sure, whenever possible, to pair the right behavior, reinforce the right behavior when you punish the wrong behavior. So the dog's chewing the shoe, you remove the shoe. Nope, we're not doing that. You negatively punish by removing, and we're going to give you a bone. We're going to give you a toy. And then you're going to promote, you're going to reinforce the correct behavior. So don't chew my shoe, but you can chew this. So you are, you want to think about anytime you don't want the dog doing something, what do I want them to do? If I don't want them to jump, what do I want them to do? Don't want them to sit. Don't want them to lay down. Don't want them just to be calm. And then you pick that, and that's what you pair it with. So nope, we're not jumping, and yes, we're sitting. So think about those things ahead. When we all see our dogs do stuff that we don't like and it bothers us, and that's why we notice, because it bothers us. It's irritating, you know, chewing things they're not supposed to, going to the bathroom in the house, barking, running around like a crazy loon. All those things are a dog being a dog, and we don't like those things, so we don't want them to happen. So if you are punishing any of those things, make sure you show the dog, hey, instead of running around like a loon, let's get a bone and hang out on the rug, or sit on the couch with me, or let's go outside and play ball. Find something that you can show the dog. Instead of doing A behavior, we're going to do B behavior, and that's worth your time because this is what's in it for you. So the last thing I want to touch on is a little bit about behavior modification. And this is going to be real brief because I don't want to get too much into it because it's not really necessary for this video. There's desensitization. So it's systematic desensitization. It's when you're slowly getting your dog used to something that stresses it out. And then there's flooding. And flooding is where you quickly and intensely get them used to something that stresses them out or expose them to that. I touch on these two for group classes just because I want people to think about there's different ways to approach different issues. If I have a dog that's nervous, stressed out by living things, so whether it's other dogs, whether it's people, I can't control what the other dog is going to do if I introduce the dog I have that's stressed out about the situation. So I want to go slow. You want to gradually, systematically desensitize your dog to that person, to those dogs. So they go, okay, I'm a little bit stressed. Now we've gotten a little closer and we're going to do fun things. We're going to, get you used to being, 10 feet away from a person that stresses you out. And make that fun. Help the dog be comfortable and see that, oh, I still have 10 feet of space from this human that I'm not comfortable with. And once the dog's comfortable there, then you can move in 9 feet or 8 feet, depending on your dog's tolerance level and their recovery response. And when you move in, then you get the dog comfortable and feeling good and build their confidence until you're all the way up to the person. And I don't do this in the same exercise, but you work up slow is basically what systematic desensitization means. And by doing that, you're building the dog's confidence, working on their comfort level, and it's making them more comfortable, and you're getting that space down slowly. The reason I do that is because you're more likely to have a dog fight. You're more likely to have your dog bite somebody if you try to rush that stuff. So don't do the, oh, well, I'm just going to have dogs come in and my people are going to give my dogs treats. Well, if your dog's not comfortable meeting people, you're just luring them into a situation they cannot handle. So you want to go slow with those things. Now, flooding is where we do it fast and intense and just make the, boom, you're in it. Now, for that, I think of things that aren't alive. Trees, floors, fire hydrants, construction buoy things, those big orange things. I've had that with dogs that go, wow, what is that? I'm going to die. It's going to eat me. Those things are not going to hurt your dog. The floor is not going to hurt your dog. A tree is not going to hurt your dog. So you can have them on leash and kind of flood the behavior. You can have them go all the way up to the tree, touch the tree, smell the tree, give them treats, pet them, and help them process, oh, that tree is not scary, or oh, this floor is not scary. That way, you know the object's not going to hurt the dog. And so you can control the environment a little bit better. And then exposing the dog quickly, they have to panic. They're going to panic, especially if they're actually, you know, fearful of the object. They're going to panic, and you're more or less just hanging out and being their, their buddy. Okay, hey, look, I'm on the floor too. I'm not scared of the floor. I'm not dying. You're going to help them with their confidence. They're going to freak out, and then start to process. Start to mentally work through that stress and go, okay, I haven't died yet. My person hasn't died yet. We're doing okay. When you start to get that coming down from that panic mode, that's when you want to reinforce. Some dogs won't take treats because they're still too stressed. So with that, I like to do like a pressure pet, just, you know, shoulder to butt. Good job. We got part of that. And then kind of wait out and see if they'll come down a little more. If they take treats, I'm giving them treats. And good job. We've got this. You can do this. If you see a shake off where the dog does a full body shake, then they're processing. Their stress relief is coming out and they're going, okay, I didn't die. So I just touch on these so that as you're going and working with your dog, if you come across something, you go, oh, they don't like to see other dogs on leash. Or we walked past a construction barrel and my dog thought it was going to eat them. Now you've got a little bit of idea of how you may want to approach that versus it being something alive or something that's just an object that's not living. And go about it more appropriately so that your dog's safe and you get the best results out of working with it. Now you can go slow and do things slow to introduce your dog to a floor or a tree. You could always go slow with those. I find some dogs do better if you flood it when it's not a living thing. But I always go slow for living things because you can't control that person, that dog's response to your dog's response. And you could actually make the behavior increase. If your dog is stressed about meeting other dogs and you make them meet another dog and they get in a dog fight, well, now you've just said, hey, look, that was a bad idea. I just proved it by forcing you to meet another dog. So go slow with that kind of stuff. And we will have several videos on dog meetings and what to look for and when to make space and when not to, you know, when you can allow interaction, that kind of thing. So that's kind of wrapping it up for the first part of this video. And we'll see you next week. Thanks.